The last time I talked to you in the last few videos, I've been talking about the monarchy, and I've been telling you all kinds of details in the scriptures about that this is the restoration of the monarchy in the book of Revelation. And when we see the verse that I talked about was Revelation 13, starting in verse 12, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast. So this authority of the first beast, and the first beast being Jerusalem and its former monarchy, its former kings and queens, mainly kings, this power and authority is given to the monarch at their coronation ceremony. So this new beast, this new king, this new monarch is going to have all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And we know that that was a wound by a sword, and yet the beast lived. And I pointed out that a beast is a king according to the prophet Daniel. We can see in Revelation that whoever becomes the new monarch over Israel and Judah and brings back that ancient monarchy and has that authority of the former monarchy in his genealogical line, or so he says and claims, which King Charles III does claim to have descendancy from the throne of Solomon and David. And they have a genealogical chart trying to prove that. So they would be, he would be the circumcised one, circumcised by a rabbi, happened to be born the same year Israel became a nation, King Charles III, that is. So he has the covenant in his flesh, and none of his brothers and none of his sons have the covenant in the flesh. So this would give the Jews the belief that, he's chosen of God, he's got the covenant in his flesh that was commanded by Moses. And so here we have, I'm trying to tell you that the beast is the king, and the beast's kingdom is also part of it. The one that the king rules, the servants under him are also part of his kingdom, part of the beast system. So where is my proof that the beast in Revelation is a restored monarchy under the power and authority of a newly coronated king who claims to sit on the throne of David? And that is because in Daniel 7, when Daniel was alarmed and grieved in his spirit, in verse 15 of chapter 7, he says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, and the visions in my mind alarmed me. I approached one of those who were standing there, and I asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me the interpretation of these things. Now listen carefully to this passage. These four great beasts, the beasts are four kings. The beast is the king, and the head of state is the king. So the one that had the deadly wound by a sword and yet lived, as I told you, was Jerusalem and its monarchy, where the crown was removed from their head. God brought a sword against his people and their monarchy because they were fattening themselves with richness and delicacies, and they did not care for God's people. The sheep and the poor and the widows and the fatherless were being completely ignored, and God was against that. So, right there, Daniel 7, verse 17, these four great beasts are four kings who will arise from the earth. And of course, we saw this, I told you this, the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. I talked about the coronation oil having what the Chinese call dragon spittle. That's the ambergris, the whale vomit that's in it. And it's more precious than gold, believe it or not. And it's the sign of Jonah. the very sign that Jesus gave to the people at the temple, that they were a wicked generation that asked for a sign, but that was the only sign he was going to give them. And this is them selecting a king who will sit on the throne of David that's an earthly king. They're not going to accept Jesus as king. So this dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority, which the king receives at the coronation ceremony, the power and authority as the head of state. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. Now this wound was by a sword. If anybody's telling you it was a gunshot wound or any other kind of wound, they don't know the scriptures well enough, because this was only by a sword. And we see in Lamentations, in Jeremiah, over and over that God brought a sword against the monarchy, against King Zedekiah, who was taken off to Babylon, against the king of Judah, Rehoboam, and the king of the northern 10 tribes, Jeroboam. And God said that they were turning his people away from God instead of drawing them to God, because when they received the power and authority, they take an oath to uphold the laws of God, and they were not doing this. And when it says, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. That's the wound by a sword, and yet he lived. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast. The authority comes to the king, who is the beast. And they worshipped the beast, the king, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" And of course, he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth blaspheming against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Well, that's because he's the monarch, he's the king, and so he has power and authority over the people. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. And if anyone has an ear, let him hear. And that basically is telling you these secrets are revealed in the Old Testament. And if you go and hear those words, you will understand. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. And here is the patience and faith of the saints. So, and I talked about how he performs these miracles, this king, he has power and authority. And down here it says, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lived. Could this be that he's making some image of these ancient kings, the monarchy of, Solomon and David and Jeroboam and Rehoboam and all of those people, the monarchy who had the deadly wound by a sword and yet lived, because it says he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast, or which is the image of a king, actually, should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the king, basically you could put there, to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one that has the mark or the name of the king or the number of his name. So when it's saying, or the name of the beast, you can insert the word king there, because Daniel told us in the interpretation by the angel that the beasts were 4 kings. The mark or the name of the king or the number of his name. And I showed you that whole royal cipher of the king, how it has his title, his name, his number, and how the royal cipher means net zero, or it means zero, and it is in secret code. So technically, when carbon is 666 and you're using cipher on a website talking about getting your carbon footprint down to zero, this is the mark of the beast. This is the mark of a king. The beast is a king. And that's what I'm trying to prove here. And we know that I've talked about this in some of the other scriptures. And then I explained this in Revelation 13:14. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, which is Jerusalem and its former monarchy, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, the king, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So this new monarch that's going to be coronated, and now we know that they've said that King Charles III will be coronated on June 3rd of 2023. If he claims to sit on the throne of David, which he does, and sitting on Jacob's pillow stone, which is supposed to be the stone that Jacob had the vision of the angels ascending and descending from heaven. This, called the Stone of Destiny, is underneath the throne chair. Now, it was returned to Scotland, and there's a big story behind that. It was not returned to Scotland in the way that somebody is claiming right now on a YouTube channel. And the Queen returned it there, but the monarchs are going to retrieve it during coronation ceremonies, but they're letting it sit in Edinburgh Castle. So it will be under Charles III's coronation chair, just like it was under Queen Elizabeth II's coronation chair. Another translation of that verse says, he ordered the people to make a great statue of the first beast. And that great statue of the beast would be the statue of a king, I would think, since the beast is a king, that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So this would maybe be a statue, possibly of David, possibly of Solomon, some king of the ancient monarchy that has an image made of the king and causing people to worship them or bow down to them. And he causes that statue to speak. We know that it says one of the beast's heads had been wounded to death and yet lived, wounded by a sword. And I was reiterating that the head is the head of a king. Because when we had the dream that Nebuchadnezzar, who was a king of Babylon, he had a dream, and the statue interpretation that Daniel gave was that King Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold on the statue. So we know that the king is the head. And so we know here in Revelation that one of the beasts had the deadly wound by a sword and did live. That's the head wound of the beast. That's the head wound of a king. So God brought in a sword against the ancient monarchy of Israel and Judah and put their kingdoms to an end. They said, woe is us, God has removed the crown from our head. So in the last days, we see in Revelation that they are choosing an earthly king, once again, like they did with King Saul. They're going to accept a monarch on the throne, and he's going to have the scepter, power, and authority of the first beast, because he's going to claim to come from the genealogical line of that first beast, of those first monarchs. And he is the one who had the wound in the head by the sword. I mean, the ancient monarchy is the one that had the wound by a sword and did live. And we see that the head is the head of a king, as we saw with Nebuchadnezzar being the head of gold on the statue. So what we're going to see is some image similar to where the king's head is on a statue, and it's going to cause people to bow down and worship this statue of the king, of the former monarchy probably, because it's going to be glorified, because it's been restored, and everyone's going to marvel because God brought the sword against his people and his monarchy there in Jerusalem, and it ended. It ended with the blinding of the eyes of King Zedekiah, and the arm of their ruling reign was withered. The hand was withered that rules. So that's what you see when you're thinking the Antichrist has a blinded eye and a withered arm. It literally is talking about a monarchy that was shriveled up, came to an end, and was no more because God took it down. Because these kings were ungodly. They were not upholding their oath as king to direct the people to follow and worship God. They were pulling them away from God. So in the end, we have a new monarch, a new king. That's the anointed one, which is the word for Messiah, ironically. And this is why they would accept King Charles III on that throne chair of Jacob during the time of Jacob's trouble, and having power and authority when he's coronated, in the scepters being placed in his hand and the crown being placed on his head. And this deadly wound is healed because Israel has become a nation now. It's been revived, and Jerusalem was returned to be the capital of Israel, and Jerusalem was recaptured in 67, as we know. And then Trump designated Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. And now what's going to happen in the near future is Israel is going to bring out the Messiah that they've been talking to and making deals with behind the scenes. Well, there's one that just went from being a prince to a king and has yet to be coronated and giving the power and authority of the scepters and the crown on his head. And when that happens, we will have the final piece in place. And I got to thinking about something that proves that the king is the head. This is kind of exciting because I just realized that this verse is incorporated in those revelations, and this has to do with the marriage of Messiah and the church. And this is in Ephesians 5:23. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Messiah is head of the church. And he is the Savior of the body. What do we have here? Messiah is the head of the church. Why? Because he's the king, and the king is the head. And it was the kings of Israel and Judah that had the deadly wound by a sword and yet lived. And that monarchy ended, but it's going to be restored. And then the head of the king, who rules over the body, which is his servants. This is revealing why Christ is the head of the bride, the head of the church, why we are the body, because we are his subjects, and because he wears the crown on his head as the king. Isn't that cool? This is revealed again in 1 Corinthians 11:3, where it says, but I want you to realize that the head of every man is Messiah, the king. That is the king. That's the head wearing the crown. And the head of the woman is man. And the head of Messiah is God. God is going to rule and reign because he's the head over all of us that are believers in him and that follow him and his laws and his, the laws fulfilled in himself, in Messiah, the second perfect Adam. And we partook of his covenant in his lifeblood, and now we're children of the king. And that's why he's the head over all of us, because he is the great King of kings and Lord of lords. Now we further see this in Colossians 2:10. And in Messiah, Christ, you have been brought to fullness. He is the head over every power and authority. The king is the head, holding the scepters, ruling in power and authority, which he receives at his coronation through the power of God's Holy Spirit. So it's saying here that he's the king over every power and authority. That means over all the kingdoms of this world. He's above it. He's the great king wearing the crowns. So we see in Colossians 2, verse 16, so let no one judge you in food or in drink or in regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths. So don't judge people because of those things, which are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance is of Messiah, Christ. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints, ligaments, grows with the increase that is from God. So he's saying, they're not holding fast to the head, Christ, the king, who is in charge and has all power and authority over all of these things. And we're not to judge other people according to, you're doing this, you're not doing this, because he is everything and he fulfills it all. And we are underneath his rule, power, and authority forever. And this is how the Messiah is the chief cornerstone, because the king is coronated sitting on the stone, and it's a special anointed stone that the king sits on, and he is anointed as the anointed one. So we know that the Messiah is the stone that the builders have rejected, but he has become the chief and head of the corner. We saw that this kingdom, this monarchy, was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And we saw this in Jeremiah 38:2. Whoever stays in this city will die by the sword or famine. And this is what the Lord says, or plague. So his people were wounded by the sword. And yet, God is going to revive them and bring back the monarchy just before Jesus descends from heaven the second time and takes over all the kingdoms of this world. And they all are going to be under his power and his authority as the great anointed King Messiah, God himself dwelling with us. And we will be in his kingdom. Now, I talked about the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit. Did you know that Eden and all the trees of Eden were cast down into hell, into the nether parts of the earth? And this is in Ezekiel 31. I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall. Now, it's talking about Pharaoh and all his army. They went down into Sheol, into the abyss. It says, I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall when I cast him down to hell with them that descend into the pit. And all the trees of Eden, the choice and best of Lebanon, all that drink water shall be comforted in the nether parts of the earth. And they also went down into hell with him, unto them that be slain with the sword, and that were his arm. So that's the king and those that ruled under him, and, as fellow servants of the king that had royal titles, that dwelt under his shadow in the midst of the heathen. To whom art thou thus like in glory and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Yet shalt thou be brought down with the trees of Eden unto the nether parts of the earth. Thou shalt lie in the midst of the uncircumcised with them that be slain by the sword. This is Pharaoh and all his multitude, said the Lord God. When it says in Revelation 17, the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So this was mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. This is the great city is Jerusalem, and Jerusalem called the mother of us all. And she is Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. This is what God said, that his people had committed harlotry against him because he was their king, he was their husband, and they played the harlot against him. This is in the scriptures, in Jeremiah and Lamentations. And she was clothed in purple and scarlet and precious stones and pearls. Now this was the ancient monarchy that was fattening themselves while the people were living in poverty, and they were not helping widows and the fatherless and the poor at all. They were living high on the hog, and they had just, what was it, 343 tons of gold. So you know they had all this gold and silver, precious stones and pearls there. And so God was destroying the monarchy of Judah and Israel at that time. And with her, all the kings of the earth committed adultery. So you had, you had the popes and all of these people that were manipulating the kings in various countries, especially England, and they were just creating havoc. And it was all because they brought these things from Babylon into all of these nations. So these people, these kings, were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. And when the king of the 10 northern tribes was setting up, Jeroboam was setting up the golden calf, making people worship in another place other than Jerusalem. And this is the woman sitting on the scarlet beast, because his people were dressed in scarlet, as we see that she was raised wearing scarlet clothes. We see that in Lamentations. And these 10 tribes were like the 10 horns that had blasphemous names, of course, because they were worshiping idols. Every single one of them was worshiping idols, and they were not continuing to worship the one true God. We see in Revelation 17:7, and the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her. Well, we know that the beast is a king, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And Jerusalem, incredibly, also sits on 7 mountains that are known as hills. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goes into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. The 10 horns from the ancient tribe of Israel, and God destroyed their kingdom because they had blasphemous names, and they were not yet kings. They were 10 tribes, and they each had names. So this is interesting to me because this is what it's looking like. But what basically you have here is you have this ancient kingdom, and you have Eden that went down into the pit, and all the trees of Eden went down into the pit. So all of that ancient kingdom, you had the first Adam who brought forth the sin of death with Eve, and the deception brought to them where they were deceived and ate of the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and God cast them out of the garden where they went to Shinar, where they later became Babylon, tried to build a tower where people went up there and chanted just like the Muslims do, trying to reach God, and they never will. The beasts that went down into the bottomless pit were Pharaoh and all his army and the uncircumcised, and you have this beast that's in the bottomless pit because it was the punishment of Eden. God destroyed that whole thing, but he's going to restore it, and everybody is going to be marveling at what God does. So I believe that Eden, and I actually did a video where I talked about thinking that Pharaoh and his army were the locusts that come up out of the abyss in the last days and terrify people. So that's in another video I did a long time ago, and I gave the explanation for that in that video. But this is the ancient beast, and this beast comes up out of the bottomless pit. That's because the place of Jerusalem has been restored, and that's where the Garden of Eden had been. So you see, this beast is coming up out of the bottomless pit and is being restored right before our eyes. And people marvel and they wonder at Jerusalem. And God is really drawing all people unto himself to Jerusalem, but they're going to go under this false one-world religion system, under this one anointed one, claiming to be the Messiah, which is an earthly king, and which the Jewish people do not believe that the Messiah is God or divine or anything like that. But they couldn't be more wrong, because as we know, Jesus is the Messiah. He's going to descend from heaven, and he's going to come take all these kingdoms, and he's going to reign, because Christ is the head of the bride, which is the church. So I hope you see that Eden went down into the pit, and this beast that arises out of the abyss, out of the pit, is going to be like the resurrection of Jerusalem as the former Garden of Eden, and a king sitting on the throne once again from the ancient monarchy. And this will be the last earthly king, as I said before, ruling for a short space, and then his time is up. It's very complicated and yet very simple when you understand a few of these things. And I wanted to say right here that anybody that's saying that America is Babylon just does not understand the scriptures, the past history, and I hope that their eyes will be open to see the truth about this, because although Israel was scattered into all the nations and brought things of Babylon, this is all talking about Israel and Jerusalem here in Revelation. It's not talking about a country. It's not talking about a modern country that did not exist before. It's talking about this ancient monarchy and how Eden went down to the pit with Pharaoh and all his army, and this is going to be restored in the last days with an earthly king who's going to have a short reign, and then Jesus is going to take it all over and put an end to these kingdoms. And as I clearly showed you, Daniel's interpretation was that the four beasts were four kings. So the beast is a king, and the head is a king. The deadly wound by the sword in one of the heads is a king, and it was healed, and it's going to be healed during the last 7 years time of Jacob's trouble by a king who I think is going to be coronated on Jacob's pillow stone, or at least seemingly that's what it is known as. But we have a head of the Messiah that wears the crown. He wears numerous crowns, including the crown of thorns, which is, as I revealed in my book, the Judean desert crown. And he's the king of Judah. He says in John 15:15, and he's saying this as King of Kings, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. And now you know, and now this is explained in such an exquisite way. I'm really thrilled to realize that the reason why he's the head of the body of friends, people that were once called servants are now friends, because they know everything that the Lord has revealed to them. And he's the head of the body, which is, the head is the king, the anointed one, the Messiah, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And it's a little bit hard for me to explain this because I'm saying it off the top of my head when I have these notes. But I hope I explained something to you that made you astonished today to understand these things of wisdom that we need to know from the power of the Holy Spirit, revealing them in our day. And I hope you're blessed by all of these things. And isn't it wonderful to know that the king was in the field and he tabernacled with the people and they saw him face to face, and he was revealed in his glory with Moses and Elijah present, and 3 of the disciples saw him in his glory in the cloud. So they were protected in the cloud so they wouldn't die when they saw his glory. And we're going to go into the cloud and be changed so that we can see him in his glory and live with him forever. And that's soon to come. So I hope you're excited by these things. And it thrills me a lot. So I'll try to get this video uploaded this evening, and I'll talk to you in the next video. From passing the tablets of the law of God, and Aaron's rod that budded, and of course there's a real gold one in there. This is the story and the deep secrets of the true Messiah of Israel, Yeshua HaMashiach of Nazareth, the Davidic dynasty returns.